Oh, hello. Let me put this down. Got another challenge for today. I want to do something with this. Seriously, ADT. Artificial double tracking or automatic double tracking. Had a session come in and he wants wide guitars. And the trouble is there's only one main rhythm track, high gain track, and I did say you could do a double track in them, and he said, well, I haven't got time, so do your best. Let's dive in and see what goes on. I'll put this beauty down. See you in a moment. I'm going to have a think about the brief history of ADT and EQ in general. So I'm going to geek out for a bit, just mumble on for a while. If you want to skip past this, I'm going to timestamp the video. Yeah, this is kind of just my interpretation of things. It might not be scientifically accurate or concise, but if there's anyone out there that feels that things I'm about to describe aren't really clear, I'm more than welcome any of your comments below so you can enlighten me, because I'm on a path of learning too, as we all are. It never stops. So on we go. ADT, artificial double tracking. It's a technique that was developed, as far as we know anyway, back in the 60s at Abbey Road, and to do with the Beatles. I think at the time John Lennon was feeling particularly lazy and didn't really want to double track stuff, so they came up with a technique using 2 tape machines, I believe, and with the delay, the time delay of the second machine, you had a phase shift, and then also there's like you get whoa and flutter with the tape machines, so which gives you different shifts in the lower end and the higher end, and the combined effect give this nice subtle widening. It's great, but in this particular example I'm going to use in Reaper, I'm looking at trying to get a high gain guitar wide, just one track. And in order to achieve that, when we think about what phase is, and in fact a lot of people think EQ causes phase shifts, but actually it's phase shifts that create EQ. You know, originally when EQ was sort of introduced, it was done in the analog domain with resistors and capacitors and inductors fed through various electronic components which delayed the signal, and then that would be combined back in with the original signal, which would give you a phase shift and would create your frequency response. Then you'd get your EQ. And then this is why in the modern world, when we use, say, digital EQs, if you put in a bell filter or something, or more so a low pass or high pass filter, if you can view through an analyzer the actual phase in comparison to the shape you've drawn with your EQ, you'll see there's a big difference. And again, with like a filter, like a low pass or a high pass, very often if you look at the phase relationship to that, once you've actually done the cut in the EQ, you'll see the phases doing this. It's going quite a way out. Back when we moved into digital EQs, there was a push as well into trying to create, obviously, minimum phase EQs, but also linear. And what they were achieving with that was it's actually introducing more delay to compensate for the phase shift. What you're actually doing is using an EQ there that won't shift the phase because it brings it all back in time. So what you draw using your EQ is what you will get. The problem with that is you can get quite severe artifacts in a different way. For instance, you can affect your transients with a linear phase EQ, in the sense that if you EQ quite severely, you can introduce what they call pre-ringing. And that's really not a very nice effect, especially when you think, when you've got the frequency response of a microphone or the room that's being captured or any of these things, there's phase shift with all of that. And it's something we're used to hearing. It's kind of the magic of what we do when we're recording. And the fact is, if you use an EQ, say you're going through a piece of analog gear, if you know the frequency response and you can see the kind of the phase shift from, let's say, a microphone, you could actually, through EQ, when you adjust that, it's the same as cascading 2 EQs. You could have one move on the first one, and the second one you do the opposite, and you bring the phase back in line. In that way, you're balancing things out. Whereas if you take something that's already got a phase shift and it's got a certain sound and you try and use a linear EQ, it's not necessarily the best thing. I think there's a place for them, definitely for critical cutting and possibly mastering if you just want to make tiny adjustments without interfering with surrounding frequencies. I suppose the only other place I'd consider using like a linear phase EQ is where I've got multiple mics on one source. But what I generally tend to do with those is I'll take those individual tracks and or waveforms and I'll group them or put them to an aux track or whatever and EQ that. But in some instances it might sound really good and you just want to make a tiny adjustment, in which case you could drop a linear phase EQ onto one of those and just make your small adjustments. I really wouldn't go mad though, digging in deep that you can cause pre-ringing and really mess up stuff, especially transients. Right, so I'm waffling on. Basically, I've moved on a fair bit from the initial idea of the tape machine running and, the woe and flutter thing that would help to give you that extra width. But in order to create a convincing double track, you've really got to introduce a lot of randomization and chaos, basically. What you're trying to achieve, this is where if you use a simple ADT set technique, for instance, if you literally only delay the one track, in stereo, it'll sound quite wide, but the minute you collapse it down into mono, you get all this horrendous, destructive sort of filtering going on, or comb filtering. Yeah, so this is why when you've got, say, just take a simple sine wave, for instance, two of the same and line them up, and you'll get like constructive interference, so that you'll increase the volume as such. But if you move the phase on the one, if you shift the one slightly off, you'll notice if you put it into a mono, as you shift it to the point where you're completely out of phase, it'll be destructive. The resulting attenuation will go down to the point where there's literally nothing. It nullifies itself. And that's an example of like just a simple sine wave. But if you start stacking up complex sound, and let's say a guitar with high gain, and you duplicate that, and you just shift the one track ever so slightly with a delay, in stereo you get your width. Doesn't sound quite right, and it's nothing like a proper double track one, because the amount of randomization and chaos when we play, everything's so different. The attack, the dynamics, the resonance of the string, the tuning, there's so many variables that's why it sounds so wide when you stick two together. So what we need to do, and this is what I've tried to achieve with this, is take that idea of not just shifting the times so that it's out of phase and it's comb filtering, it's ugly, but actually introduce some oscillators and sort of chaos into it in as many ways as possible through phase distortion and other things to try and make the duplicate of the original track like into its own original track. So when they're then combined, they don't cancel each other out or sound too phasey, and when they're back in stereo, they're nice and wide. I've been looking around at different plugins. There's lots of doubler plugins out there and ADT plugins. Some have got various low-frequency oscillators in that will oscillate both the pitch and amplitude. There's all these different things that they'll change to try and help you give that width. But what I've actually done is I've stacked a few different plugins which I found, which are free plugins, most of them. There's a couple of paid plugins in this example, but it still sounds fine without them. For some reason, two of the plugin manufacturers or makers or designers seem to have dropped off the earth, which is a real shame because they're really, really good. I've managed to track them down, so I want to give a big shout out to those guys. I'll mention their names, and I'll also put a link in the description below to these so you can use them. I suppose on that note, I'm going to jump into the session and have a chat about these plugins and have a look at what I've done and see what you think. Hopefully it'll be useful. I'll see you in there. Okie dokie, so welcome to Reaper. What I've literally just imported the one guitar track, just a snippet of it. Through the whole track I couldn't cut it up and use parts of it to drag across where the same section had been played twice in one take and put that on, because that's another way of doing it, put that on the other track. There wasn't enough components to be able to do that all the way through to double it. So what I've got here is a right and left from the same track, just stacked next to each other so you can hear what it would be like with proper double tracking. And then I've got all these little plugins going through various techniques and approaches to try and get the width wider and wider and still retaining sort of mono compatibility with it. There's a tiny, tiny little bit of phasing there, but it's nothing really noticeable. So I'm going to switch all of this off for now and go through all the little tricks and various bits I've discovered along the way and explain what's going on. So if I flip to the left and right track, these are the actual double tracks that I've copied from one and put together, so you can hear what true double tracking is going to sound like. There we go, nice and wide. So if I mute the right track, that's this one, and come over to this copy of the first one, and we'll just put that one in. What I've got, I'm using Neural Amp Modeler, and there's the same amp, it's the Bogner Uber Shell on all 3 tracks. I've slightly tweaked the EQ on this one, which is the duplicate, which is giving it a slight bit of width. You'll hear now. So what I've actually done is on NAD-IR. Now, when I said certain things are free, you can use whatever impulses you got. There's thousands of decent IRs out there, guitar, cab IRs and stuff. There's a couple here I'm using. I've got the Jens Bogren pack, which I bought because it's really well done. And I've also got, let's have a look, what else have I got? Yeah, the Rect Essentials pack from Ownhammer. I'll put this in the link. I think they're superb, both sets of IRs, and I tend to lean towards those an awful lot over other stuff. So basically these two, at the moment, I've set it to the Cuckoo one on the Jens Bogren one on the left track, and on the right track, it's also on the Cuckoo one. On the duplicate track, I'll push this over now. If you look at the goniometer here, you'll see when I play this back now with these 2 tracks in. It's pretty mono, and that's basically because the only alteration so far is just a slight tweak on the EQ of the amp model. Same model, as I said, on both tracks. So this is a little technique I sort of stumbled across years ago, and I noticed it's kind of picking up. There's a little thing you can do more in the analog world, and I'm surprised it works with digital stuff, but it seems to, is where if you would say DI, send out and reamp, if you've only got one track, and you say you reamp from the one DI, bring that one back in, and then a second one you send out, you flip the phase, you flip the polarity on the way out, you send it through your amp and all of the various analog components, and your speaker, more importantly, because you get a lot of asymmetric sort of non-linearities and stuff happening there with the push-pull of the cone in the air and rarefication and stuff. Too much detail, but the point is then as that comes back to, say, your pre, when it's coming back in, you invert it again at that point so it comes back in the right way up. So you're flipping it on the way out, sending it through all the analog loveliness, and before it comes back in, you flip it again, so they're both back in phase. And you seem to get all these even order harmonics. I mean, we're quite sensitive in the sort of 100 to 250 hertz range, sensitive to phase and asymmetric sort of waveforms. We can sort of really pick them up in that area. And it seems doing this, which I stumbled across years ago, but I've never really bothered with it that much because I usually try and double track. But it seems doing this actually does a really good job of actually giving you some width. Not as much as you'd have if they were really double tracked, but it certainly helps. So this is one of the stages I thought I'd experiment with in here. So if you ever listen now, what I've got, at this point before Neural Amp Modeler, inverted the polarity. So if we turn that one on, and then there's another one in here, which is coming in after the NAD-IR impulse response player or processor, whichever you want to call it. And then that's being flipped back again. If you look at the difference now, I'm going to turn these off quickly and then put them back on as I'm playing. And you look at the goniometer or the phase scope, you'll see. It's actually quite impressive through the digital plugins, just how much extra width that's given us already. That's marvellous. So next thing, this is keeping it simple with all of these slight changes to try and create all of this randomization and chaos, is back to the NAD-IR. I've actually switched this channel over from the Jens Bogren one to this chunk IR in the Rect Essentials pack from Ownhammer. So I'll play it now and I'll just move it across, and you can hear that, you can see the difference on the goniometer. So getting wider. This is all good, and that's just a couple of simple tricks. So now we get into some of the interesting free plugins. The first one I've been playing with is the JCJR ChaosPhaser, which is this little one here, and it's quite a brilliant plugin. I searched the internet to try and find this, and actually stumbled across it. It's really hard to get hold of. It's open source. It's a JSFX one, which is why I just threw into Reaper because it's a lot easier. But you can I'll put it in the description, and I'll put a link to it. You can get a VST wrapper for this now that you can drop into various DAWs, and you can import your JSFX into stuff like CUBASE, and they work equally as well. So it's really opened up some of these fantastic plugins into other DAWs. Moving on with this, I've got to try and find some info on this. I'm just having a look down here. James Chandler Jr., that's his name. There we go. If you start from the top, you've got various inputs. You've got mono, stereo, mid-side. The nice thing with Reaper is, because of the containers, that's the thing I love about Reaper, is it doesn't matter if it's a MIDI track, stereo, mono. Reaper, when you have a mono file in one of the containers, it splits it left and right, and that sort of, so the ChaosPhaser actually treats it similarly to a stereo file. Starting off at the top, you've got this LFO shape, which goes from a sine wave to a triangle. And with the sine wave, you kind of get this acceleration as you get to the bottom and the top. This is continuously variable as you come across here.
I'm kind of in the middle of the sine wave in a triangle, and the triangle is more steady. It's just, obviously it's oscillating, but you haven't got this sort of ramp either end. And that's been split into, you've got different LFO rate ranges here. And it's also got, like, as I read down, you'll see there's a random rate and LFO chaos, as he's called it, which is here. Which is similar things in the sense that it's not fixed. It's random. And that's what you want. You want as much of this randomization in there. So basically there's the rate range here, where you can start at 0.1 to 1 hertz and so on and so forth. I've set this. I'm not going to play with these settings because I quite like them where they are. And then you've got the rate center, which is a separated control to give you more finite control. So I believe at 10 to 100, it's got a multiplier of 10, I think. So when this is set to, as I've got it 248, that's like 24 hertz or whatever. Moving on down, what we got left, LFO rate right versus left offset. The way you set this is -1 to +1 octaves. And you basically, it's 1 octave is doubling of the frequency up, and an octave down is halving of the frequency. So that's how that's working. I would suggest, I mean, this might all sound a bit nonsensical, but the best thing to do is just, you can either look, you can copy these settings here that I've messed around with, or is just play with it and just get a feel for how it's sitting in the stereo image, and then also when you flip it back to mono. On this one, there's 16 stages in total, the phase stages, and if you crank that, it really does start to get a bit horrible, so I've literally set it to 4. So the LFO random rate on the octaves, as he said, this is just randomly and independently changes the rate, but it always changes smoothly, that's quite important. When it gets to positive zero crossing, LFO rolls the dice, because the algorithm built in, and sets off on the new cycle. It never suddenly changes, so you don't get any strange, unpleasant things going on in there. So yeah, we've got the LFO chaos. The chaos frequency modulates the left LFO rate with the right LFO rate, whilst also modulating the other way around, so you get this cross modulation, and it causes it to stagger basically. So, and on down from the chaos one, there's the other interesting aspect. So you've got the envelope follower, which basically, this envelope tracks the audio gain, and the input level can change how the LFO works and whether it's staggering faster or slower. So depending on the input level, it will alternate that as well, adding more chaos and randomization. Moving on down, we've got, as I explained earlier about the number of phase stages, you'll see if you play with this and crank it up, it gets quite horrible. So like I said, I've kept it down on 4. And they're basically, phasers are set up, they're like an all-pass filter, which doesn't have any effect on the frequency response, which is why it's called an all-pass filter, but it changes the phase according to the frequency. So what else has he got in here? The document that I found for this is colossal, and he does go in depth. But
I don't want to bore you for too long with this.
So what have we got? The phase center frequency, self-explanatory. Then phaser LFO mod, plus and minus semitones. I don't find it. Yeah, 0 to 36 semitones on that one, and that's the distance of the LFO frequency sweep centered on the phaser center frequency. What else? Moving on down, envelope follow mod gain. So this basically is another stage where it's again sort of working off the dynamics. This works well with the more dynamic sources and percussive sources, so it works really well with things like drums and obviously guitar. If you've got like a droney synth or something, it's going to be pretty dull. It's not really going to be very dramatic. And what have we got? The phaser resonance kind of makes amps bigger and smaller, and I think it's like a cascade of all-pass filters from the output fed back into a cascade of all-pass filters on the input. Well, it's wet and dry. Doesn't really make a huge difference. The wet signal obviously is up because on this we're only using it on the one track. I've put the stereo width up, although we're panned hard right on here, a little bit because the way it reacts with the fact that the mono signal's been split within Reaper. And dry signal's obviously pulled right down because I don't want any of that, because why would I want to reintroduce signal that's on the left side? It's just going to cause problems. And then set the output gain. So
that's a lot of stuff crammed in a little plugin. Sorry for the long-winded explanation. I should have just sent you the ridiculously long PDF file the guys made and let you read it through, but just play with it and let your ears do the work. I'm going to play this now and you can hear it when I kick it in. So far we've got a few EQ changes on the neural amp modeler. We've got a different IR on NAD IR. I've done the polarity flip thing, and now we're going to put the ChaosPhaser in. I mean, on its own, it's a huge difference. And I'll just flip to mono so you can hear what it sounds like. Mono with it out, with just the amp and the polarity shift and the IR, and then mono with this in. So. So you can hear there in mono, we're getting some, it's sounding a little bit too phasey, a little bit too filtered. It sounds great in stereo, but it sounds better in mono without this on, which is why there's this, all these other plugins following it to just try and add a little bit more chaos. So back to stereo. Big difference. So the next stage, let's leave that as it is. I put in the Kilohearts phase distortion, which is a great little free plugin. The description and everything's online, and this is obviously still available. And I'll put all the links to all of these things below for you to go and check out and download and have a play with. One thing I like about the Kilohertz stuff is the way it gives you all of this at the bottom. It's fantastic. You can see without looking anywhere. That's the amount of distortion added. Normalize affects the sensitivity on the input. We don't really want that up too far because we don't want it in a sort of insensitive to stuff. Tone is the frequency at which it's operating, so it's like a low pass. Bias adds a constant phase offset. So I've just tweaked that a little bit. You can get carried away and it sounds really nasty and phasey. That spreads to the left and right channels, which seem to make a difference. Again, it's the Reaper thing. And then there's the mix, which is flat out. This gives you even more stereo width, but I'll play this now with the Kilohertz one in. So we're getting wider, and I'm going to flick. That's great, even wider, and it's helped a little bit with the summing of it into mono. I took it a little bit further. With all of this shifting, we're losing, in order to try and, where I've set a lot of these envelopes and various things, I'm trying to sort out the low end issues you get with the phase cancellation and everything, so that seems fuller, but I've actually lost a bit of top end, which is why I put this EQ, which I'll drop in on the end. And also there's a bit of another free one from Mr. Stephen Slate, the Fresh Air plugin, which is a great little plugin. But as I add these extra processes, managing to keep most of the frequency response to the guitar okay, but it's just lost a bit of top end, which we put back here. This next one, Olaf Matisse, I think. Another one you can't get anymore. It's the only plug in the chain that's got any plug-in delay compensation within Reaper. The rest are all zero, but this is adding sort of 5 milliseconds. And then it starts off with a minimum delay of 10 milliseconds. But it's basically, it's quite simple. You've got your artificial double-tracking levels, the pan, which doesn't really matter for us. And you've got the whoa and the flutter, as we were sort of looking at with, going back to the 60s when it all started. And this is a great little plug-in. There's a few extra things on the whoa and the flutter. You've got an option of using a sine wave or a triangular wave. They're not too extreme, these settings, but it's just enough to give us a little bit more chaos. So I'll plonk this one in now and we can have a listen. So yeah, we've got some of our bottom end back in with that one. I'm stacking these up. But the left channel's got a little bit more upper mids and sort of, you know, the presence. So I've given it a little tweak here. Just pulled out some muddy 300 on this EQ and just a little boost here, which I'll drop in, and then I'll add the fresh air and you can hear the full chain. There's one more to drop in as well, which I'll show you afterwards, but let's put the EQ on now. So yeah, that's sounding great. And all of those are free plugins, apart from the IRs, but there's so many really good IRs out there that you can get now that you don't even need to buy those. I just really like them. They're done so well. Yeah, the last thing I had to just add a little bit more change was this lovely little plugin that's come out recently by Joey Sturgis, the TONEFORGE, and that's the DI Match plugin, which is quite cool because it's got the spectral matching going on with the EQ here, which you can see. I've just put this in. It's not pushed all the way, but it also does level matching, which is quite nice. And then you've got this active circuit, which I think it's supposed to emulate the preamp of an active pickup, and you can crank it a bit so you almost get like clipping going on as well. So, but I did find once I'd got to the point of adding this as well, I could hear quite clearly the delay between the original track and the duplicated track. So in order to compensate that and pull it back in, because I don't really want it doing that, I just added a sample delay by air windows here on the original track, and I've also done the same amount on the double track just to keep it fair, and that's just 15 milliseconds on each. So, but I'll play this with the Joey Sturgis TONEFORGE in now, and you'll hear the difference. Gives that an extra little bit more, but if you listen to these little staccato-y bits at the beginning, you'll hear this going on. Blonk, blonk, blonk. So if I drop this little sample delay in, this is an Air Windows plug, by the way. Seriously, check out the Air Windows plugins. The guy's a genius. That's for another video though. So now I've aligned those. Listen to the difference. I'm going to flick back between the actual proper double track, which was lifted from the same track, just different parts, and swap between the two so you can hear the difference. Close. So close. And I'll drop it into mono so you can hear the difference as well. I actually think I prefer the duplicated track with all this processing in mono to the doubles. Crazy. There you go. That's this ridiculously long chain of destruction on this channel. You know, done tastefully so that it's not completely destroying the signal and turn it into a big mush. There is, if you listen to them isolated, tonally, it's changed quite a bit, but it's still combined and in the mix sounds really effective. And I think you'd really struggle to know that it's not genuinely been sort of double tracked. Let me just take that one. I'm going to quickly swap over to a cleaner crunch tone now, which we've got here, just for you to have a listen to. This on the bus, these aren't free. This was just me playing around with a bit of final EQ on the two, and I really like this LA3A by Waves. It's been around forever, but it just, you get this nice mid-forward sound and punch with it. So I'm going to swap these over to a cleaner tone. I'll leave the IRs the same. That's double track. Yeah, so like I said, I'll put the links to all of these various plugins, the JCJR ChaosPhaser and the ADT Vacuumsound Olaf Matthias one in the description below. You can't seem to get them online anymore, and neither of them seem to have been active for a few years, and they were sort of free plugins anyway, so I don't think anybody's going to mind. But shout out to these guys for coming up with these fantastic tools. Obviously there's this wonderful little kilohertz phase distortion, and just how these stack, especially with this polarity switch going in and out, does a fantastic job. I suppose I want to leave it there, really. Just switch back. I've probably missed something, knowing me. It's been fun. Sorry for all the waffle before. If you skip forward to this bit, you didn't have to suffer it, which is great. But I just wanted to put in a little sort of introduction to sort of my thinking and the whole process of phase and EQ and what brought me to this point of stacking all of these to try and get good results. It was a lot of head scratching and messing around to get to this point, but I think it's really good results considering, and it doesn't take much just to save that signal chain as a preset and drop it on in future. I'm hoping I don't get too many projects where there's a mono track they want ultra wide, but this kind of opens things up now. If you've got lots of lazy guitarists coming through that really can't be bothered to double track, or it takes hours because you're dropping it in line by line, there's a chance you could do this and save some time and money and frustration and headache. Anyway, this has been fun. I hope this has been helpful. If you've got anything beneficial out of this, or this has helped you in any way, that's great. And to sort of help me keep making these, it'd be great if you could like and subscribe, because that makes a difference. Like I said in the last video, it sort of encourages me to get on and keep coming up with these things and putting them out there. Any comments, much appreciated, good or bad. I'm if you can set me straight on something, I'm all for that. And if this has been helpful, thumbs up too. I'm going to leave it there because this video is getting long, and we'll catch you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.